Elena's fingers trembled as she signed the contract cancellation, her phone buzzing with 17 missed calls from David's family. The same people who, just hours before, had laughed at her cheap engagement ring and whispered about their son marrying down. Elena Martinez stared at her reflection in the bridal shop's three-way mirror, the ivory silk flowing around her like liquid moonlight. At 28, she had built an empire from nothing, but today she felt small, smaller than she'd felt since childhood. The dress was perfect, but the memory of last night's family dinner clung to her like smoke. "You sure this is the one, Mija?" her assistant Maria asked, though she already knew the answer. Elena had tried on 47 dresses across 5 cities, seeking something that would make David's mother, Patricia Blackwood, finally see her as worthy. "It has to be," Elena whispered, running her hand along the delicate beadwork. Each crystal had been hand-sewn, costing more than most people's cars, but she knew Patricia would still find fault. Too flashy. Too desperate. Too. Elena. Her phone buzzed. David's text. "Mom wants to meet about the rehearsal dinner. Can you be at the house by 3? Elena's stomach knotted. The Blackwood estate always made her feel like an intruder, despite the 18 months she'd been part of David's life. She'd purchased companies with less anxiety than she felt walking into that marble foyer. What do you think? Have you ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who should have accepted you from the start? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, across town, David Blackwood adjusted his Hermes tie for the 3rd time, staring out his corner office window at the Seattle skyline. At 31, he'd never questioned his family's judgment, until Elena. She was different from the socialites his mother paraded before him at charity galas. Elena listened when he spoke about his dreams of expanding their tech firm beyond his father's oil empire. She laughed at his terrible jokes and fell asleep during his favorite boring documentaries without complaint. But she was also complicated. There were phone calls she took in other rooms, business trips that seemed oddly timed, and a way of speaking about industry leaders as if she knew them personally. When pressed, she'd smile mysteriously and change the subject. His mother's voice echoed in his memory from last night's dinner. "She's hiding something, David. Mark my words." David shook his head, loosening his tie. His mother saw conspiracy in everything, especially in women who didn't fit her narrow definition of suitable. Elena might not have attended the right schools or known the right people, but she loved him. That had to be enough. His assistant knocked. "Your mother called. Family meeting at 3 about the wedding arrangements." David's chest tightened. Patricia's family meetings about Elena never ended well. He grabbed his jacket, hoping this time would be different, knowing it wouldn't be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Blackwood estate as both Elena and David drove through the wrought iron gates, neither knowing that in 2 hours, everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and family would shatter completely. Elena parked her modest Honda Civic next to a row of luxury vehicles, each one worth more than most people's homes. She checked her reflection one final time, straightening her simple black dress, the one David said made her eyes look like midnight stars. She'd need every bit of confidence for what was coming. The Blackwood family sat arranged like a tribunal in the sunken living room, their positioning deliberate and intimidating. Patricia Blackwood, draped in Chanel and diamonds, occupied the central wingback chair like a queen holding court. David's father, Richard, stood by the marble fireplace, his silver hair catching the light as he swirled an afternoon scotch. David's sister, Vanessa, perched on the leather sofa with the predatory grace of someone who'd perfected cruelty as an art form. Elena entered the room feeling their collective gaze sweep over her like searchlights. David rose from his chair, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elena, darling," Patricia's voice dripped with false warmth. "Please, sit. We have so much to discuss about your special day." The pause before special landed like a slap. Elena settled onto the edge of the sofa, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, a posture learned from countless boardroom negotiations where showing weakness meant losing millions. "Mother," David began, but Patricia raised a manicured hand. "Now, Elena, we've been thinking about the guest list," Patricia continued, pulling out a leather-bound folder. "There are certain considerations for a family of our standing. We can't have just anyone mingling with the governor and the tech executives." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I understand the importance of your social circles." "Good," Vanessa chimed in, her voice sharp as glass. "Because some of the names on your list are questionable. Maria Gonzalez? Your housekeeper's daughter? Really, Elena, This isn't a charity event." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not hurt, but recognition. She'd built a fortune reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses. And now she saw these people clearly for the first time. "Maria isn't my housekeeper's daughter," Elena said quietly, her voice steady as steel. "She's my business partner." Richard chuckled from his position by the fireplace. "Business partner? What business would that be, dear? Your little consulting thing?" The condescension in his tone was thick enough to cut. Elena noticed David shift uncomfortably but remained silent. Always silent when she needed him most. "Among other things," Elena replied, her tone neutral despite the fire building in her chest. Patricia leaned forward, her smile razor-sharp. "Elena, sweetie, we need to be honest here. This family has worked for generations to build our reputation. David's father's oil investments, our tech acquisitions, our charitable foundations, it's all very delicate. We can't have someone with unclear credentials, potentially damaging what we've built." "What my mother means," Vanessa added with fake sisterly warmth, "is that love is wonderful, but marriage is business. And frankly, you bring nothing to this table except, well, yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt each heartbeat echo in her ears as she processed what she'd just heard. Across from her, David stared at his hands, his cowardice written in every line of his hunched shoulders. "I see," Elena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what, exactly, would convince you that I'm suitable?" Patricia's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Well, for starters, that ridiculous engagement ring has to go." She gestured dismissively at Elena's hand. "David, what were you thinking? It looks like something from a mall kiosk. For the photos alone, we need something appropriate. I've already spoken to Tiffany about their heritage collection." Elena looked down at her ring, a simple solitaire that David had saved for months to buy, the ring he presented while stammering through a proposal at their favorite coffee shop. It wasn't about the diamonds or the setting. It was about the man who'd chosen it, who'd said it reminded him of her eyes. "The dress needs to change too," Vanessa continued, emboldened by her mother's approval. "Something more traditional. Less flashy. We don't want people thinking David married her." "Vanessa." David's voice cut through the air like a whip, finally showing some spine. But Elena had heard enough. Something inside her shifted, like tectonic plates moving after years of pressure. She stood slowly, her movement causing the room to fall silent. "I think I understand perfectly now," she said, her voice carrying a new quality, something cold and powerful that made Richard's hand pause halfway to his mouth with his scotch. Patricia smiled victoriously. "I knew you were a smart girl. This is about family, Elena. About what's best for everyone." Elena nodded thoughtfully, then reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, and within seconds, she was connecting to a number that would change everything. "Marcus?" "Yes, it's Elena. About the Blackwood acquisition we discussed. I need you to cancel it. Immediately." The room went silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock. "Yes, all of it. The oil divisions, the tech subsidiaries, everything. Pull our backing from the Singapore project too." She paused, her eyes never leaving Patricia's increasingly pale face. "Because sometimes, Marcus, you realize that some families aren't worth saving." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse with surgical precision. Richard's Scotch glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor. What do you think happens when someone's true power is finally revealed? Have you ever witnessed a moment when everything changed with just one phone call? Let us know your thoughts. David's voice came out as barely a croak. "Elena, what did you just do?" Elena's smile was small, sad, and absolutely devastating. "I just cancelled your family's future, David. All $1.2 million of it." The sound of Patricia's sharp intake of breath was the only thing that broke the suffocating silence that followed. The grandfather clock's ticking seemed to grow louder in the stunned silence that followed Elena's revelation. Patricia's face had gone from triumph to confusion to a sickly shade of pale that clashed with her perfectly applied rouge. What are you talking about?" Patricia's voice cracked on the last word, her composure finally showing its first real fracture. Richard moved first, abandoning his position by the fireplace to stride across the room. Now see here, young lady. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not a game. Elena's voice cut through his bluster like a blade through silk. She remained standing, her posture unchanged, but something had shifted in her bearing. The woman who had entered this room seeking acceptance was gone, replaced by someone far more dangerous. Marcus Chen is my business partner and the managing director of Martinez Holdings. We've been your silent partner for the last 8 months. David shot to his feet, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Elena, stop. Whatever you think you're doing. I'm doing exactly what your family asked for, Elena replied, turning those midnight eyes on him. I'm showing them who I really am. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. You're insane. You can't just call someone and cancel. We don't even know you. How could you possibly? Because 3 years ago, when your father's oil investments in Venezuela went south and he was facing bankruptcy, he needed capital fast, Elena said, her voice steady as a surgeon's scalpel. Martinez Holdings provided that capital. When your tech acquisitions needed backing for the Singapore expansion, we provided that too. When your family's charitable foundation needed a cash infusion to avoid the scandal of unfunded commitments, we were there. The color drained from Richard's face completely now. That's impossible. Martinez Holdings is run by Miguel Martinez. I've met with him personally. Miguel Martinez is my grandfather. He's been retired for 2 years due to his health. Elena's voice softened slightly at the mention of her grandfather, then hardened again. I've been running the company under his name because, as you've so eloquently demonstrated today, people have difficulty taking a young Latina woman seriously in business. Patricia clutched her pearls, literally clutched them, her knuckles white against the strand. This is ridiculous. David, tell her to stop this performance. But David was staring at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Pieces were clicking into place, the mysterious phone calls, the business trips, the way she spoke about industry leaders as if she knew them personally. Because she did know them. She was one of them. The Singapore project, he whispered. That's 40% of our projected revenue for next year. Elena corrected gently. I've just instructed Marcus to withdraw our investment and redirect it to the Jakarta opportunity we've been considering. It's a better long-term play anyway. Richard's businessman instincts finally overrode his shock. Now wait just a minute. You can't just. We have contracts. Legal obligations. Elena tilted her head slightly, a gesture David had always found endearing but now recognized as predatory. Actually, if you read the fine print, which I assume you did, being such astute business people, you'll find that Martinez Holdings has a 72-hour withdrawal clause for any project where we feel our investment is threatened by unstable partnership dynamics. Unstable partnership dynamics. Vanessa's voice climbed to a shriek. What the hell does that even mean? It means, Elena said, picking up her purse with deliberate calm, that when a family shows such obvious contempt for one of our executives, even one operating under deep cover, we consider that a red flag for future business relationships. The room erupted in chaos. Patricia began speaking rapidly in the clipped, panicked tone of someone trying to control a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her reach. Richard pulled out his phone, presumably to call his lawyers. Vanessa alternated between cursing and demanding explanations. But David just stared at Elena, his face cycling through emotions like a slot machine: confusion, betrayal, admiration, fear. Elena, he said, his voice barely audible over his family's panic. Elena, please. Let's talk about this. Privately. She looked at him for a long moment, and for just an instant, her mask slipped. He saw the hurt there, the disappointment, the grief for what they'd had and what they'd lost. Talk about what, David? She asked quietly. About how you sat there and let them tear me apart. About how you never once stood up for me. About how you've been engaged to a woman for 18 months without ever once asking what she actually does for a living. I thought you were trying to impress them. I thought if I just gave them time. Time for what? Time to decide if I was worthy of their son. The pain in her voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. I've been sitting at your dinner table for a year and a half, listening to your father complain about cash flow problems that I was solving. I've watched your mother dismiss me as some kind of gold digger while I was literally keeping your family afloat. Patricia, having heard enough, stepped between them. This is preposterous. Even if what you're saying is true, which I doubt, you can't just destroy a family because your feelings got hurt. Elena's laugh was soft and absolutely terrifying. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not destroying your family. I'm simply choosing not to save it anymore. She moved toward the door, her heels clicking on the marble with military precision. David, I'll have my things moved out of our apartment by tomorrow evening. The ring will be on the kitchen counter. Elena, wait. David's voice cracked with desperation. We can fix this. My family, they just need time to understand. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the brass handle. Your family had 18 months to understand, David. They chose not to. And so did you. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than if she'd slammed it. In the silence that followed, the Blackwood family faced the wreckage of their assumptions and the staggering reality of what they'd just lost. Richard was the first to speak, his voice hollow. Jesus Christ, David. Do you have any idea what we've just done? Elena's hands trembled slightly as she started her Honda, the modest car now feeling like a disguise she no longer needed to maintain. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd driven a $30,000 car to visit people she'd been keeping financially solvent. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from the Blackwood family, but she ignored them all except one. Marcus, it's done, she said as she pulled through the estate gates for what she assumed would be the last time. Elena, are you sure about this? The Singapore project was. I'm sure. She stopped at the red light at the bottom of the hill, staring back at the mansion in her rearview mirror. Redirect everything to Jakarta. And Marcus? Release a statement tomorrow morning announcing that I'm resuming public leadership of Martinez Holdings. It's time. What about David? Elena's throat tightened. What about him? She ended the call and drove toward her apartment. Their apartment, the modest two-bedroom in Queen, and that David had insisted they share despite his family's disapproval. She'd loved that apartment because it was theirs, because it had nothing to do with money or power or expectations. Now it felt like a crime scene. But as she pulled into the parking garage, she saw David's BMW already there, and her chest constricted. She'd hoped to pack and leave without this confrontation. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she could hear David pacing inside the apartment, his voice carrying through the thin walls as he spoke urgently into his phone. No, Dad, I don't know what her exit strategy is. I don't know if she'll reconsider. I don't even know who she really is anymore. Elena's key turned in the lock, and the apartment fell silent. David stood in their living room, her living room now, she supposed, still wearing his suit from the office but with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. His phone was on the coffee table next to a half-empty bottle of wine and what looked like printouts of financial documents. Don't, she said before he could speak. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Elena, please. He stepped toward her, and she instinctively stepped back. The hurt that flashed across his face was almost enough to break her resolve. Almost. I've been researching your company. Martinez Holdings is. God, Elena, you're worth more than my entire family combined. Is that supposed to make this better? She dropped her purse by the door and moved toward their bedroom, her bedroom, to start packing. Now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm worth defending. He followed her, hovering in the doorway as she pulled a suitcase from the closet. That's not what I meant. I meant, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think you were struggling? Why did you let my family treat you like that? Elena began folding clothes with mechanical precision, each movement sharp with controlled anger. Because I wanted to know who you really were, David. I wanted to know if you'd love me without the money, without the power, without the name. And now I do. That's not fair. His voice cracked. I did love you. I do love you. No. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a girlfriend who didn't threaten your family's expectations, who made you feel needed, who fit into the little box they created for David's phase before he married someone suitable. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me? The question hung in the air like a blade. 18 months, David. 18 months of family dinners where they made little comments about my background, my education, my clothes, my job. 18 months of you sitting there silently, hoping it would just, what? Get better on its own. David slumped against the doorframe. I thought if I just gave them time to know you. They didn't want to know me. Elena's voice rose for the first time, her composure finally cracking. They wanted me gone, and you let them think that was acceptable. You let them treat the woman you claim to love like an inconvenience to be managed. The apartment's landline rang, cutting through the tension. David glanced at the caller ID and winced. It's my mother. Answer it, Elena said, zipping up her first suitcase with more force than necessary. I'm sure she has thoughts about how to handle this situation. David stared at the ringing phone, then at Elena, then back at the phone. After 6 rings, it stopped. I can't, he said quietly. Can't what? Can't choose between you and them. I can't. Elena, they're my family. They raised me. They're not perfect, but they're more important than I am. It wasn't a question. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elena could hear the neighbors upstairs moving around, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, the hum of their refrigerator in the kitchen where they'd shared countless quiet morning coffees. David's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and his face went pale. What? Elena asked despite herself. The Singapore deal. The news is already out. Stock prices are. Jesus. Elena. The Jakarta redirect is brilliant, but the timing. He looked up at her with something like awe. You didn't just cancel a deal. You orchestrated a complete business realignment in under 2 hours. I've been planning contingencies for months, she admitted. Your family's company was always a risky investment. Too much ego, not enough innovation. I kept us involved because I thought. She trailed off. Because you thought you were going to be part of the family. Because I thought the family was worth saving. She moved past him to gather toiletries from their shared bathroom. I was wrong. David followed her again, like a lost puppy. Elena, what if I chose you? What if I told them they were wrong, that I'm marrying you regardless of what they think? Elena paused, her hand on the bathroom light switch. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest, a treacherous, foolish hope that maybe. When? She asked quietly. When what? When would you tell them that? Tomorrow? Next week? After you've had time to think about it? After you've weighed the pros and cons of choosing your fiancé over your trust fund? The fact that he didn't answer immediately was answer enough. Elena turned off the light and walked back to the bedroom. That's what I thought. Her phone rang. Marcus again. She answered it on speaker while continuing to pack. Elena, the Blackwood lawyers are already calling. They want a meeting first thing Monday morning. Apparently, they're claiming breach of contract and threatening litigation. Elena's laugh was sharp. Let them threaten. Our legal team has been preparing for this possibility for months. They'll find that every contract was written to protect our interests, not theirs. David stared at her. You planned this. I planned for this, she corrected. There's a difference. I hoped it would never be necessary. Elena, Marcus's voice came through the speaker. There's something else. The Jakarta partners want to meet with you personally next week. They're impressed by the quick pivot and want to discuss expanding the partnership. Schedule it, Elena said, closing her second suitcase. I'll fly out Wednesday. Jakarta. David's voice was small. You're leaving the country. Elena finally looked at him directly. I'm going back to work, David. I'm going back to being who I actually am instead of who you needed me to be. The landline rang again. This time, David answered it. Hello, Mother. His voice was resigned. No, she's still here. No, I don't think she's bluffing. Because, Mom, she just scheduled a business trip to Indonesia like she does this every day. He paused, listening. Because apparently, she does do this every day. Elena could hear Patricia's voice through the receiver, shrill and panicked. David held the phone away from his ear. She wants to know if there's anything that would make you reconsider, he said to Elena. Elena picked up her suitcases and moved toward the door. Tell your mother that respect isn't negotiable. And neither is love. She paused at the front door, looking back at the apartment that had been their home. David stood in the hallway, still holding the phone, looking lost and broken and younger than his 31 years. What would you do if you discovered the person you loved had been hiding their true identity to test your feelings? Share your thoughts on whether Elena's test was fair. Elena, he said softly. I do love you. I know I failed you, but I do love you. She nodded slowly. I know you do, David. But love without courage is just a pretty word. And I deserve more than pretty words. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through both of their hearts. 3 days later, Elena sat in her grandfather's study in the family estate in Medina, surrounded by the warm scent of leather-bound books and the faint aroma of his favorite Cuban cigars. Miguel Martinez, at 78, still commanded respect despite the oxygen tank that now accompanied him everywhere. His sharp brown eyes, so like Elena's, studied the financial reports spread across his mahogany desk. Mija, he said in his gravelly voice, mixing Spanish and English the way he had throughout her childhood, you did the right thing. But your heart, it's breaking, no. Elena curled deeper into the wingback chair where she'd spent countless hours as a child, listening to her grandfather's stories about building his empire from nothing. My heart is fine, abuelo. It's my judgment I'm questioning. Ah, but the heart and the judgment, they are connected. He set down the papers and leaned back. Tell me about this boy. Not the business. Tell me about him. Elena's throat tightened. She'd been avoiding this conversation, burying herself in work calls and contract reviews. But her grandfather's gentle patience had always been able to crack her defenses. He made me laugh, she admitted quietly. Real laughter, not the polite kind from business dinners. He would bring me coffee in bed every morning before work, not fancy coffee, just whatever we had in the kitchen. And he listened when I talked about wanting to expand into renewable energy. He didn't understand all of it, but he listened. But when it mattered, when they were tearing me apart in front of him, he said nothing. The words came out raw. He just sat there and let them decide whether I was good enough for their family. Miguel nodded slowly. Your grandmother, she faced the same thing when we were young. Elena looked up, surprised. Her grandmother had died when she was 12, but Elena remembered her as elegant and confident, completely secure in her place at Miguel's side. Sigh, it's true. When I was starting the business, working 18-hour days, sleeping in the office, her family thought she was marrying beneath her. Her father, he owned 3 restaurants, considered himself muy importante. He told your grandmother she was throwing her life away on a dreamer with dirty fingernails. What did she do? Miguel's eyes grew distant. She almost believed him. For months, she pulled away from me. Wouldn't return my calls, avoided places where we might meet. I thought I had lost her. Elena had never heard this story. Her grandparents had always seemed like a fairy tale to her, pure love conquering all obstacles. So how did you get her back? I didn't. Miguel's smile was sad. She had to choose. And for a while, she chose them. It took her 6 months to realize that her family's approval would never make her happy if she spent the rest of her life wondering what we could have been. She came back. She came back. But Elena, Mija, the choosing, it had to be hers. I could not force it, could not convince her with words or gifts or promises. She had to decide that love was worth more than peace. Elena stared out the window at the garden where her grandmother had taught her to tend roses, where she'd learned that beautiful things required both patience and strength. Her phone buzzed. Another call from David. She'd been ignoring them for 3 days, but they kept coming, dozens of them, along with text messages that grew increasingly desperate. Answer it, Miguel said gently. Abuelo. Answer it, Mija. You cannot heal what you will not face. With trembling fingers, Elena accepted the call. Elena. David's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept in days. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I know. I've been busy. With Jakarta. Among other things. She kept her voice neutral, businesslike. Elena, I need to see you. There are things I need to tell you. Things about my family, about why I. He paused, and she could hear him struggling for words. Please. Just give me 1 hour. I'll come to you, wherever you are. Elena looked at her grandfather, who nodded encouragingly. I'm at my grandfather's house in Medina. Do you know where? I'll find it. Thank you. Elena, thank you. After she hung up, Miguel reached across the desk and took her hand in his weathered one. Mija, Let me tell you something your grandmother told me when she came back. She said, Miguel, I realized that I was not choosing between you and my family. I was choosing between the woman I was and the woman I could become. You understand? Elena nodded slowly. I think so. This boy, he is making the same choice now. The question is not whether he will choose you over his family. The question is whether he will choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience. And that choice, it cannot be made for him. An hour later, Elena watched from the window as David's BMW pulled through the gates of the Martinez estate. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he sat in the car for a long moment before getting out, as if gathering courage. Miguel had tactfully retreated to his bedroom for a nap, leaving Elena to face this conversation alone. When David knocked on the front door, she answered it herself. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down that looked like he'd slept in it. Which, she realized, he probably had. Hi, he said softly. Hi. They stood there for a moment, the weight of 3 days of silence between them. This place is... He gestured at the Mediterranean-style mansion, the manicured gardens, the fountain in the circular drive. This is where you grew up. Summers and weekends. My parents died in a car accident when I was 8. Abuelo raised me. David's face crumpled. Elena, I'm so sorry. You never told me. You never asked. The words weren't cruel, just true. He nodded, accepting the hit. Can we talk? Really talk? She led him to the garden, to the same bench where her grandmother had once told her that strength wasn't about never bending, it was about knowing when to bend and when to stand firm. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? Sometimes the hardest battles are with the people we love most. What are your thoughts? Elena, David began, then stopped. Started again. My family, they've been bankrupt before. When I was 12. Elena turned to look at him, surprised by this admission. My father made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. We lost everything. The house, the cars, almost the business. For 2 years, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bellevue while he rebuilt. My mother, she never recovered from the shame of it. The fear of falling again, of not being good enough for the world she'd grown up in. It made her hard. Suspicious of anyone who might threaten our security. David. Let me finish. Please. His hands were shaking slightly. She didn't hate you because of who you are. She hated you because she was terrified that you would take me away from the safety she'd fought so hard to rebuild. And I was terrified too. Not of losing the money, but of losing the only family I had. Elena felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. But you know what the worst part is. David continued, his voice breaking. I was so focused on protecting what we had that I never saw what we could have. You weren't a threat to my family's security, you were the answer to it. And I was too much of a coward to see it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not the ring box, but something smaller. Inside was a simple gold locket, old and tarnished. This was my grandmother's. The only thing my mother kept when we lost everything else. She gave it to me 3 days ago and told me to give it to you. Elena stared at the locket. She wants me to have this. She wants you to come back. David's voice was barely a whisper. They all do. My father. Elena, when the news broke about who you really are, when the financial papers started calling you the stealth heiress and analyzing your business strategy, my father cried. Actual tears. Because he realized that you'd been saving us while we treated you like garbage. Elena's hand trembled as she took the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young couple, David's grandparents, she realized. They want to apologize, David continued. But more than that, they want to understand. My mother has been reading everything she can find about Martinez Holdings, about your grandfather's story, about how you built the renewable energy division. She's amazed by you, Elena. Ashamed of herself, but amazed by you. And you. Elena's voice was barely audible. David slid off the bench and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the woman who loved me enough to test whether I was real. And Elena. I failed that test. I know I failed it. But if you'll let me, I want to take it again. And this time, I want to pass. Elena looked down at this man she'd loved, still loved if she was honest with herself, and saw not the weak boy who had sat silent in his family's living room, but someone who had finally found his courage. David, she whispered, what are you asking me? I'm asking you to let me prove that love can learn to be brave. I'm asking you to let me show you that I can be the man you deserved from the beginning. He squeezed her hands. And I'm asking you to marry me again, not the woman you pretended to be, but the woman you really are. The brilliant, powerful, amazing woman who could have destroyed my family but chose mercy instead. Elena felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. You want to marry Elena Martinez, CEO of Martinez Holdings. I want to marry the woman who brings me coffee in bed and falls asleep during documentaries and laughs at my terrible jokes. His voice was strong now, certain. I don't care if she's worth 10 million or 10 billion. I care that she's worth everything to me. In the garden where her grandmother had once chosen love over fear, Elena made her own choice. Elena didn't answer David's proposal immediately. Instead, she helped him to his feet and led him deeper into the garden, past the roses her grandmother had planted, to a small gazebo overlooking the lake. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and for the first time in days, Elena felt like she could breathe. Tell me something, she said, settling onto the cushioned bench inside the gazebo. If I hadn't been wealthy, if Martinez Holdings didn't exist, if I really was just a consultant struggling to make ends meet, would you have eventually stood up to your family for me? David sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne mixed with exhaustion and 3 days of worry. I want to say yes immediately, but you deserve honesty, not quick answers. He stared out at the water, thinking. I hope I would have. But Elena, I've never been tested like that before. I've never had to choose between the people who raised me and the person I love. I'd like to think I would have found my courage eventually, but you don't know for sure. No, I don't. He turned to face her fully. What I do know is that losing you, really losing you, has taught me something I never understood before. My family's approval isn't worth having if it costs me the woman I want to build a life with. Elena studied his face, looking for any trace of the uncertainty that had characterized their relationship. What she saw instead was a man who had been fundamentally changed by the possibility of loss. Show me, she said quietly. What? Show me you mean it. Call your mother. Right now. Tell her you're here with me and that you're asking me to marry you again, not despite who I am, but because of who I am. David's hand moved instinctively to his phone, then paused. Elena saw the flicker of old anxiety cross his features, and then watched him push through it. Okay, he said, pulling out his phone. But Elena, whatever she says, whatever any of them say, I need you to know that I've already made my choice. I made it the moment I realized I'd rather fight for you than live without you. Patricia Blackwood answered on the first ring, her voice tense with barely controlled panic. David? Thank God. Please tell me you found a way to fix this situation. Mom, I'm with Elena. The line went quiet except for the sound of Patricia's sharp intake of breath. David, you need to be very careful what you say. The lawyers think if we can demonstrate that she acted in bad faith. Mom, stop. David's voice was firm in a way Elena had never heard before. I'm not calling to discuss legal strategy. I'm calling to tell you that I just asked Elena to marry me. Again. David, no. Son. You're not thinking clearly. This woman has manipulated all of us. This woman, David interrupted, his voice growing stronger, has been subsidizing our family for months while we treated her like she wasn't good enough to breathe our air. This woman could have destroyed us completely and chose not to. And this woman, he looked at Elena, his eyes soft with love and firm with resolve, is going to be my wife, with or without your blessing. Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she'd thought had died 3 days ago in that living room. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elena wondered if Patricia had hung up. Mom. David said finally. I'm here. Patricia's voice was smaller now, uncertain. David, we were trying to protect you. From what? From happiness? From a woman who loves me enough to test whether that love is real. From being hurt. From being taken advantage of. Your father and we've seen what money does to relationships. Mom, Elena has more money than our entire family. If she wanted to take advantage of me, she could have bought and sold us without me ever knowing. Instead, she lived in a modest apartment and drove a Honda and let me think I was taking care of her because she wanted to know if I loved her or the idea of her. Elena reached over and took David's free hand, squeezing it gently. The gesture seemed to give him strength. And I failed that test, Mom. I let you and Dad and Vanessa convince me that she wasn't good enough, when the truth is I wasn't good enough for her. But she's giving me a chance to try again, and I'm not going to waste it. Another long pause. Then, what do you need from us? The question surprised them both. David looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. I need you to apologize to her. Really apologize, not the kind of sorry that comes with conditions and explanations. I need you to understand that she's not joining our family, we're becoming part of hers. And I need you to respect her, not because she has money, but because I love her and she deserves it. And if we can't? If this is too hard for us? David's hand tightened on Elena's. Then I'll miss you. But Elena is my future, and I'm not going to let anyone, not even you, make her feel unwelcome in her own life. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in days, they weren't tears of pain. I want to speak to her, Patricia said suddenly. Put her on the phone. David looked at Elena questioningly. She nodded and took the phone. Hello, Mrs. Blackwood. Elena. Patricia's voice was shaky. I owe you an apology. Several apologies. We were terrible to you, and you had every right to withdraw your support. More than that, you had every right to destroy us completely. The fact that you didn't. Mrs. Blackwood. Please, let me finish. I spent 3 days reading about your company, about what you've built, about the projects you funded. The Children's Hospital in Guatemala, the scholarship program for underprivileged students, the renewable energy initiatives. Elena, you're not just successful, you're making the world better. And we treated you like you were beneath us. Elena's throat tightened. I never needed you to be impressed by my resume. I just needed you to see that I loved your son. We should have seen that from the beginning. I should have seen it. Instead, I let my own fears and prejudices blind me to the kind of woman David had found. Patricia paused. Can you forgive us? Can you give us a chance to do better? Elena looked at David, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and terror. Mrs. Blackwood, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you give David your mother's locket to bring to me? Another pause. Because when I saw the news coverage, when I read about how you've been quietly supporting our family while we dismissed you, I realized that you were exactly the kind of woman my mother was. Strong, intelligent, generous, and willing to sacrifice for the people you love. I gave him the locket because I hoped you might still love us enough to let us be your family. Elena's voice was barely a whisper when she answered. I'd like that. The conversation that followed lasted another hour. Patricia put Richard and Vanessa on the phone, and each offered their own apologies, awkward, heartfelt, and genuine. Plans were made for dinner the following evening, not at the Blackwood estate but at Elena's grandfather's house, where Miguel could finally meet the family his granddaughter had chosen. When Elena finally hung up the phone, she and David sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the lake. So, David said eventually, you never actually answered my question. What question? Will you marry me? The real you this time, not the version you thought I needed. Elena turned to face him, this man who had finally learned to fight for love. David Blackwood, are you prepared to marry a woman who runs board meetings in 3 languages, who will probably make more money than you every year for the rest of our lives, and who expects her husband to stand up for her when it matters? Elena Martinez, he replied, pulling her close, I can't wait to spend the rest of my life being worthy of exactly that woman. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena felt the broken pieces of her heart settling back into place. Not the same as before, stronger, clearer, more sure of what love really meant. What do you think makes love stronger? Being tested by adversity or being protected from it? Sometimes we discover what we're truly made of only when everything falls apart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new ways of building bridges between 2 very different worlds. But tonight, In the garden where her grandmother had once chosen courage over comfort, Elena had chosen to believe in second chances. And for the first time since walking out of that living room 3 days ago, she felt like she was finally home. Elena sat in her grandfather's study at 2 a.m., still wearing her wedding dress but with her shoes kicked off and her carefully styled hair falling loose around her shoulders. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd begun this journey in this very room, seeking advice about David's family, and now she was ending it here, surrounded by the same leather-bound books and the lingering scent of Cuban cigars. Miguel emerged from his bedroom in his robe, moving slowly with his oxygen tank. He took one look at his granddaughter and poured himself a small glass of brandy, then settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. "So," he said in Spanish, "tell your abuelo what happened." Elena recounted the entire story, David's revelation about the debt, the timing of his proposal, the legal implications of their marriage contract. With each word, she felt herself growing colder, more analytical, more like the CEO who had built an empire and less like the woman who had believed in love. When she finished, Miguel was quiet for a long time, swirling his brandy and studying his granddaughter's face. "And the Jakarta deal?" he finally asked. "Worth 200 million over 5 years. It positions us as the dominant player in Southeast Asian renewable energy. It's everything we've worked toward." "And David's family?" "Bankrupt within 6 months if the consortium exercises their acceleration clauses." Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. "Complete liquidation of assets. They'll lose everything." Miguel nodded slowly. "Including David." "David made his choices, abuelo. He chose to lie to me. He chose to use our relationship as a business strategy. He chose his family's comfort over my trust." "Sigh, he did." Miguel leaned forward. "But Mija, what choice will you make?" Elena looked at her grandfather in surprise. "I already made it. The deal moves forward. Martinez Holdings doesn't negotiate with emotional terrorists." "Ah, but that is CEO Elena speaking. What does Elena the woman choose?" "They're the same person, abuelo." "Are they?" Miguel's eyes were gentle but piercing. Because the CEO would have seen through David's deception months ago. The CEO would never have hidden her identity to test love. The CEO would have walked away the first time his family showed disrespect. He paused. But Elena the woman, she stayed. She fought. She forgave. She loved. Elena felt tears threatening, the first she'd allowed herself since walking out of the garden. "And look where it got me. Used. Manipulated. Standing here in a wedding dress with no wedding. It got you truth, Mija. Painful truth, but truth nonetheless." Elena's phone, which had been buzzing constantly with calls from the Blackwood family, lit up again. This time, it wasn't David or his parents. It was Vanessa. Against her better judgment, Elena answered. "Vanessa." "Elena, thank God." Vanessa's voice was thick with tears. "Please, I know you have every right to hate us, but I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening." "David doesn't know I'm calling. None of them do. But Elena, you need to know, David didn't plan this. The debt, the legal implications, the timing, Dad orchestrated all of it without telling David." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "When Dad realized who you really were, after you cancelled the Singapore deal, he went into full panic mode. He started making desperate moves, borrowing money, leveraging assets. But he also started researching you, your company, your business relationships." Elena's mind raced, pieces shifting into new patterns. "He discovered the Jakarta opportunity 3 weeks ago," Vanessa continued. "He realized that if David married you, he could use community property laws to influence your business decisions. So he manipulated David. Told him that you tested him once and passed, so now it was David's turn to prove his love by putting your happiness above business concerns." "That's not." Elena trailed off, remembering David's exact words in the garden. "You have to call it off. Not we need you to call it off or my family needs this. Just you have to. Elena, David thought he was protecting you from a business decision that would hurt people you'd grown to care about. Dad made him believe that choosing love meant choosing your peace of mind over profit." Elena sank into her grandfather's leather chair, the wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. "How do you know all this?" "Because I was there when Dad coached him on what to say. I was there when the lawyers explained how to frame it as a personal request rather than a business demand. Vanessa's voice cracked. Elena, I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but David, he really thought he was protecting you. Dad made him believe that true love meant shielding you from having to make the hard choice between business and family. Elena's hand trembled as she held the phone. Where is David now? He's been driving around Seattle for the past 6 hours. He won't answer anyone's calls, won't come home. Mom found him at your old apartment building around midnight, just sitting in the parking garage. What was he doing there? I think he was remembering what it felt like when love was simple, before all of this got so complicated. After Elena hung up, she sat in the darkness for a long time, her grandfather's presence a comforting anchor as she processed this new information. Abuelo, she said finally, what would you do? The wrong thing, Miguel admitted with a rueful smile. I would let pride and hurt make my decisions. I would punish everyone involved, including the boy who was trying to love you the only way he knew how. But your grandmother, she would ask different questions. Not who wronged whom, but what serves love. Not who deserves punishment, but what creates the future we want to live in. Elena closed her eyes, thinking of her grandmother's voice, her gentle wisdom, her belief that strength and compassion could coexist. The Jakarta deal could be restructured, she said slowly. Instead of regional exclusivity, we could limit it to renewable energy projects. That would reduce the consortium's leverage over David's family. At what cost to Martina's holdings? 30% of the projected revenue. Still profitable, just not empire-building profitable. Miguel nodded. And David? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I can trust him again, Abuelo. Even if his father manipulated him, David still chose to lie to me. He still chose to handle this behind my back instead of trusting me with the truth. Sigh, he did. The question is whether he can learn to choose differently. Elena's phone rang again. This time, it was David. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Elena. His voice was hoarse, broken. Elena, I know you hate me. I know I've lost any right to ask anything of you. But I need you to know something. I'm listening. I called off the wedding. Elena's breath caught. What? I called my family, the hotel, the vendors, everyone. I told them the wedding was cancelled and that it was my decision. I told them that I couldn't marry you under false pretenses, that you deserved better than a man who let his father manipulate him into lying to the woman he loves. David. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness, Elena. I'm not calling to beg you to reconsider. I'm calling to tell you that I understand now what love really means. It means trusting the person you love with the truth, even when that truth might destroy you. It means choosing their happiness over your security, their trust over your comfort. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I love you, Elena Martinez. I love your strength and your brilliance and your incredible capacity for forgiveness. I love that you tested me because you wanted to know if I was real. And I love that you walked away when you discovered I wasn't. His voice broke. I just needed you to know that losing you taught me how to be the man you deserved from the beginning. Where are you? Elena asked softly. Does it matter? It matters to me. There was a long pause. I'm at Pike Place Market. At the coffee stand where we had our first date. It seemed appropriate. Elena looked at her grandfather, who was watching her with eyes full of love and understanding. David, she said, her voice steady despite her tears, stay there. I'm coming to find you. After she hung up, Miguel smiled. And the Jakarta deal. Elena was already moving toward the door, her wedding dress rustling around her ankles. I'll restructure it. 30% less profit, but everyone gets to keep their dignity. And David. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. David gets a choice. He can have me exactly as I am, brilliant, powerful, wealthy Elena Martinez who will never again hide who she is for anyone's comfort. Or he can walk away and find someone who fits better into the box his family created. And if he chooses you. Elena's smile was small but genuine. Then we'll learn together what love looks like when it's built on truth instead of tests. As she drove through the empty Seattle streets toward Pike Place Market, still wearing her wedding dress with her grandmother's pearls in her lap, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to save a dying relationship, but the quiet hope of someone who had finally learned the difference between love and the idea of love. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what we're really willing to fight for. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and giving love one more chance? Share your thoughts on whether some betrayals can be forgiven. The market was closed, but she could see a lone figure sitting on the steps near their old coffee stand, and she knew that the next few minutes would determine whether this story ended with bitter wisdom or brave new beginnings. Elena found David exactly where he said he'd be, sitting on the stone steps of Pike Place Market in the pre-dawn darkness. The iconic neon sign cast red and pink shadows across the empty street, and the familiar scent of salt water from Elliott Bay mixed with the lingering aromas of fish and coffee from the closed stalls. He looked up when he heard her heels clicking on the cobblestones, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hope, fear, and something that looked like wonder as he took in the sight of her approaching in her wedding dress, her grandmother's pearls clutched in her free hand. Elena. He started to stand, then seemed to think better of it and remained sitting. You came. You asked me to. She settled beside him on the steps, the ivory silk spreading around them like a protective cocoon. And I had some things to say that couldn't wait for a phone call. David stared straight ahead at the empty market. If you're here to tell me you never want to see me again, I understand. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that. Do you? Elena's voice was quiet, contemplative. Or do you deserve the truth, the same way I deserved it from you? He turned to look at her then, and she could see he'd been crying. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion and grief. Vanessa called me, Elena continued. She told me about your father's manipulation. About how he coached you, made you believe you were protecting me instead of deceiving me. David's jaw clenched. That doesn't excuse what I did. I still chose to lie to you. I still chose to handle this behind your back instead of trusting you with the truth. Yes, you did. Elena's honesty was gentle but unflinching. And David, that hurt me more than anything your family ever said or did. Because I expected better from you. I trusted you to be different. I know. And I failed you. He dropped his head into his hands. I failed you the same way I failed you in that living room 3 weeks ago. When it mattered most, when you needed me to choose courage over comfort, I chose wrong. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the first hints of sunrise beginning to paint the sky above Elliott Bay. Tell me something, David. If you could do it over, not just today, but all of it, what would you choose? David lifted his head and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I would choose you. From the very beginning, I would choose you. I would stand up to my family that first dinner when my mother made that comment about your dress. I would ask you about your work instead of assuming I already knew. I would trust you with the truth about our debt instead of trying to manage the situation myself. His voice grew stronger with each word. I would choose you, Elena, every single time. Even knowing it might cost you your family. Especially knowing that. David turned to face her fully. Because these past 3 weeks, watching my father manipulate and scheme, seeing my mother's prejudice, realizing how they've used both of us, I understand now that losing their approval isn't the worst thing that could happen to me. Losing you is. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the knot of pain and anger she'd been carrying. There's something else you should know, she said softly. I'm restructuring the Jakarta deal. Limiting the scope so the consortium can't use it as leverage against your family's debt. David's eyes widened. Elena. No. You can't sacrifice that opportunity for us. Not after everything we've put you through. I'm not sacrificing it for you, she said firmly. I'm restructuring it because it's the right business decision. A sustainable partnership is better than a predatory one, even if it's less profitable in the short term. She paused. But David, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to save your family. I'm doing it because it aligns with my values as a businesswoman and as a person. I understand. Do you? Because I need you to be very clear about who you're marrying if we move forward. I'm Elena Martinez, CEO of Martinez Holdings. I make decisions based on what's best for my company and my principles, not on what makes life easier for the people I love. I will never again hide my power or diminish my success to make anyone more comfortable. David nodded solemnly. I don't want you to. Elena, these past 3 weeks, seeing you in action, Watching you handle this crisis with such grace and strength, I've never been more attracted to you. I don't want the hidden version of you. I want the real you, the powerful you, the you who can make grown men tremble with a single phone call. Despite everything, Elena felt herself smile. That's good, because she's the only version available. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city wake up around them. Elena, David said finally, I have a confession. Her stomach tightened. Another one. This one's different. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and familiar. Her engagement ring, the simple solitaire he'd saved for months to buy. I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, ever since I found it on our kitchen counter. David. I'm not proposing again, he said quickly. I know I've lost that right. But I wanted to ask you something different. He held the ring up to catch the morning light. Would you consider dating me? The real me, not the version I thought you needed. Starting from the beginning, with complete honesty this time. Elena stared at the ring, so modest compared to the Tiffany Heritage Collection Patricia had insisted upon, but so much more meaningful because of what it represented. Not status or strategy, but a young man in love buying the best ring he could afford for the woman he wanted to marry. What would that look like? She asked softly. It would look like me taking you on proper dates and asking you real questions about your work. It would look like me standing up to my family when they overstep boundaries, not because you ask me to but because it's the right thing to do. He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. It would look like me learning to be worthy of the woman who built an empire and still chose to love a coward like me. You're not a coward, David. You're just learning. Learning to be brave enough for you. Elena reached out and took the ring from his palm, feeling its familiar weight. There would have to be conditions. Name them. Complete transparency. About your family, your finances, your fears, everything. No more protection through omission. Agreed. I keep my name when we marry. Someday. If we marry someday. I wouldn't want it any other way. And David. Elena's voice grew serious. I can forgive the lies, and I can forgive the manipulation, but I can't survive another betrayal. This is your last chance to get this right. David reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. Elena, I swear to you on my grandmother's memory, on everything I hold sacred, that I will never again let fear make my decisions about us. You deserve a man who fights for you, not one who fights against his own courage. Elena studied his face, looking for any trace of the uncertainty that had characterized their relationship. What she saw instead was a man transformed by the possibility of loss into someone capable of real love. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Okay, David Blackwood. You can date me. The real me. Starting now. David's smile was radiant as he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Elena was laughing. What? He asked. I'm still wearing my wedding dress. It's beautiful, he said, standing and offering her his hand. Want to get some coffee? I know a place. As they walked hand in hand toward the coffee stand where they'd shared their first awkward conversation 2 years ago, Elena felt the broken pieces of her heart settling into a new configuration, not the same as before, but stronger, clearer, built on a foundation of truth instead of assumption. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather. Mija, did you choose love or logic? Elena typed back, both, abuelo. Finally, both. The sun was fully risen now, painting the market in golden light. Around them, vendors were beginning to set up their stalls, the city stirring to life with the promise of a new day. Elena, David said as they reached the coffee stand, I have one more question. She turned to him, eyebrow raised. Will you keep the ring? Not as an engagement ring, but as a promise. A promise that someday, when I've proven I'm worthy of the question, I'll ask you properly. With complete honesty and absolute certainty that I'm choosing you not because you can save my family, but because I can't imagine building a life with anyone else. Elena looked down at the simple solitaire in her palm, then slipped it onto her right hand instead of her left. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. As David ordered their coffee, the same ridiculous vanilla latte with extra foam that he'd teased her about on their first date, Elena realized that this was what real love looked like. Not the fairy tale version where everything was perfect from the beginning, but the grown-up version where two people chose each other again and again, especially when it was hard. So, David said, handing her the coffee, tell me about this Jakarta deal. I want to understand what my brilliant girlfriend does for a living. Elena's smile was pure sunshine. David, we're going to need more than coffee. I'm about to change the renewable energy landscape in Southeast Asia, and it's going to take at least 3 hours to explain properly. I have all the time in the world, he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, Elena believed he meant it. As they settled onto a bench overlooking Elliott Bay, Elena's phone rang one final time. It was Patricia Blackwood. Elena looked at David questioningly, and he nodded encouragingly. Mrs. Blackwood. Elena, D. Patricia's voice was tentative but warm. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to call and, well, to ask if you might consider joining us for dinner this evening. At your grandfather's house, if he'll have us. I have some apologies to make, and I'd like to make them properly this time. Elena looked at David, who was watching her with hope and love and absolute faith in her decision. I'd like that, Mrs. Blackwood. But I should mention, I'm bringing my boyfriend. Your boyfriend? Elena's laugh was pure joy. It's a long story. But yes, David and I are dating now. Starting fresh, doing things right this time. Oh. There was a pause, then Patricia's voice came back warmer than Elena had ever heard it. Well then, I can't wait to meet him properly. The real him this time. As we reach the end of this story, what do you think is more important in a relationship? Never making mistakes, or learning how to make things right when you do? Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfection, but about choosing each other again and again, especially after everything falls apart. As Elena hung up the phone, she realized that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not someone who would never hurt her, but someone who would never stop trying to be worthy of her love. And in the golden morning light of Pike Place Market, surrounded by the sounds of the waking city and the promise of second chances, Elena Martinez finally understood that the best love stories aren't about finding the perfect person. They're about finding the right person and building something perfect together, one brave choice at a time. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one.